Welcome back. In this video we're going to actually do two things. We're going to talk just a little bit, first of all, about the do-while loop, which is the only post-test loop that we have in processing. And then after that we're going to move on and talk about the concept of nesting loop structures, in particular nested for loops. So first of all, let's talk about our post-test loop, do-while. Okay? So our other two loops, while and for, are both pre-test loops, which means that we evaluate the control expression before we execute the loop body. So it's possible, if the expression is false, that the loop body is never executed. On the other hand, in a do-while loop, since it's post-test, the control expression is after the loop body. Okay? If you follow the flow, you can see that that means that the loop body has to be executed at least one time. Then the control expression is evaluated, and if it's true, we loop back and execute the body again. If, on the other hand, the control expression is false, then we fall out and do the first statement after the do-while loop. Okay? So basically we stand the while loop on its head, do the body first, then the control expression. So our syntax for the do-while loop looks like this. It looks like do, and then in curly brackets we have our loop body, followed by while and the expression, our control expression, in parentheses. And this is our only control structure in processing that ends in a semicolon, so you'll have to watch that. You need to have the semicolon there. Okay? So you start with the do, have your curly brackets, then your loop body is in the middle, finish it up with the while and the loop test. Okay, so except for the word do and the semicolon, it really is just standing the while loop syntax on its head as well. So if you're in a situation when you know that the body of the loop needs to execute at least one time, then the do-while loop is the one that you want to use. Otherwise, you probably want to have either a for a counting situation or a while loop for a situation where it may happen an arbitrary number of times, but a number that's not counting or not known when you write the loop. Alright, so do-while, we don't really use that often. If you want to see an example of it being put to use, check out the textbook in Chapter 5. We have the target drawing example that uses a do-while loop. And we won't go ahead and do another example of that, though, here in the videos. So, let's go ahead and move on to the concept of nesting. Just like our selection statements that we've seen before, our if statements in particular, we can nest loops as well. It means we can have a loop within a loop. And that's often utilized when we have to iterate over some rectangular thing. And right now, the thing that we're going to be looking at would be an image. So an image is a rectangular collection of pixels, basically, a series of rows of pixels. And so we can use a for loop that's nested with inside another for loop to iterate over all the pixels in the image. Okay, so let's take a look at how that might be done. First of all, one of our earlier examples, we went through and we asked the user to input 10 different grades. Okay? And so in the first iteration of the loop, we got that first grade from the user. And then the second iteration of the loop, when I was 1, we got the next grade from the user. In the third iteration, they typed in the third grade. And finally, in the 10th iteration, they typed in the 10th grade. Okay? So if you imagine these things lighting up in order, it's like we got this one first, then this, then this, then this, then this, and so on until we have all 10. So really, it just goes down one line of numbers and reads them in from the user. That was the grade example that we looked at previously. Now what we're going to do instead with nesting is have two loops, one on the outside, and if we talk about images, the outside is going to pick which row we're going to process. And then the inner loop is going to be on the inside of the outer loop, obviously. And it will be used to process all the pixels in that row. Okay? So the outer loop chooses the row, Then the inner loop goes down all the pixels in that row. Then we increment the outer loop counter, go down all the pixels in that row. Increment the outer loop counter, go down all the pixels in that row, and so on. Okay? So our outer loop, if we're processing an image, selects which row we're looking at, and the inner loop selects which pixel in that row we're examining. All right? So here's a template that we can use to look at all the pixels in an image. And this is a nested for loop structure. Our outer loop is going to be using the variable y, and it's going to pick the rows of pixels. So we'll have y start at 0, go until it reaches height minus 1, and then increment y. So that'll look at every row of pixels. And then for that particular row, we'll use another for loop. It's going to start out at 0 with x, go clear over to the width of the image, and increment by 1. And then we can do something to that particular pixel. Okay, so in our previous slide, the outer loop here, this would be my while, or my y loop rather. So y equals 0 is the first row, and the x loop goes down all the pixels in that row. Then when y is 1, the x loop starts all over again, does all the pixels in the second row. When y is 2, the inner loop starts all over again, does all the pixels in the third row, and so on. Okay, so that's how our nested for loop structure works. There's also a byte in this chapter which will show you a sort of an animated demonstration of how a nested for loop would access different pixels. And so you want to take a look at that, and then join me for the next video in this sequence, which is going to be where we apply this idea of nesting to do an image processing task, in particular to do an image filter, where we try to find the edges where colors change in an image. So that's what's up next, edge detection using nested for loops.